Mulvaney. Today's working lunch will be starting in about 1 minute's time. So stay where you are. We're live across LinkedIn and a bunch of YouTube channels today. My guest today is going to be James Day from Jagex, who are a computer games developer, and we're going to be talking about how you can up your content game. So stay with us. We're going to be starting today's session very shortly. Welcome to Working Lunch. We're going to be starting today's session in about 30 seconds time. My guest today is James Day from Jagex, and we're going to be talking all about content, social marketing, etc. Starting today's session very soon, so stay where you are, and we'll be kicking things off in a few seconds time. Good afternoon. This is James Mulvaney, and welcome to Working Lunch. Great to be back. As ever, we've got another great guest for you today. We're going out live across LinkedIn and also today on my YouTube, as well as podcast.co and Radio.co YouTubers as well. So wherever you're watching, welcome on board. The concept of Working Lunch is really simple. Each Wednesday at 1 p.m, we talk to a different guest and we discuss 3 actionable strategies that you can put into practice immediately to assist you with growing your business, growing your audience, or growing your team. Each session's streamed live. Obviously, we're live right now, and you'll be able to watch it again on demand. So please feel free to share it with your networks if you've just tuned in, or if you can't spare the hour or so today that we're going to be live, you can watch it again later on. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in my guest for today. Hey, James, how's it going?
Hello, James. All right, I'm good. Thank you very much. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Nice sunny day today, so all is well.
Yes.
So welcome to Working Lunch. You're head of community management and social media for Jagex. So can you just start off with just tell us a bit about what you do?
Yeah, so a little bit about Jagex to begin with. We're a games company based in Cambridge. We have 2 kind of major IPs in RuneScape and Old School RuneScape that have been they're kind of multi-million pound MMO franchises.
Yep.
And they've been around sort of since 2001. So we are an old hat in the British games industry. So yeah, my role is head of community management and social media. So I am responsible for all of our organic, social, and our communications with our players, and ensuring that our players are represented both within the studio, so their views are heard to the rest of the developers, but also that we are articulating our messages to our player bases in a way that we think is best in order to engage them, to be able to encourage them to kind of, I suppose, react the way that we would like them to react, and understand their frustration sometimes when they come out, and also their celebration as well.
So with your games, I mean, I must admit, we had a chat before. I'm not a huge gamer. I used to play games when I was kind of growing up, but I know that over the last sort of, 5-10 years, it's taken off in a big way in terms of, it's more of a social thing now. So whereas people used to sit in sort of like the dark room in the corner and play games, which I guess they still do, but now there's so much more communication because of how platforms have evolved. So people are constantly talking. They're really using it like a networking tool or like a, almost like a social thing. So kind of like, I think that change has been really interesting. But also, we've seen people like PewDiePie, for example, getting huge amounts of traffic and have really grown, like become almost like, celebrities in just playing games online and sort of streaming it. So I'm kind of curious to sort of talk a bit about how that links in, but I guess let's kick things off. Obviously your kind of core responsibility is social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to touch on quickly on what you were just saying beforehand, in terms of the kind of the broadening of gaming or games outside of kind of the sphere of you're kind of locked in your basement sort of approach that perhaps was the stereotype a few years ago. But no, it's one of those things we at Jagex say we are the home of living games, and I think there's a a big that's a big statement, because living is not just the world inside of the game, but it's also what happens outside of the game. So you're feeling part of a community. Are you offering those opportunities for players to interact with each other, both inside of the game and outside of the game? And also you kind of nurturing those opportunities for players to kind of feel like they are part of something, and ultimately make them, obviously, you play for the game, but you kind of tend to stay for the community. So we try and make sure that we make sure that our players feel like they are in something that they're going to be in for the long haul.
Got it. So let's kick things off. Social media, first of all.
Yes.
How do you kind of ensure that people are kind of engaged with you on your social channels?
So we are actually in the process of doing a social audit at the moment. So some of these answers, if you come back to me in perhaps a couple of months, it might be a slightly different answer. But we are fundamentally looking to our existing player base as advocates. So that's kind of our primary strategy, is to make sure that we are servicing those players with the communications and the engagement opportunities that are required in order for them to then share it amongst their audiences, and keep the perhaps players who come in more seasonally to be informed as to what we are doing and how we're doing it. So we have a really core group of players who are willing to go above and beyond to help kind of support and amplify that messaging, which is fantastic. And as I say, we are a company that's been around for a long time. We've had our games that are around for a long time. So we are in a fortunate position in that we have those individuals and those groups of individuals who are willing to go kind of above and beyond to amplify that. It's
about sort of encouraging super fans then.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I think we're going to touch on influencers a little bit later on, but it kind of is a pseudo influencer strategy sort of thing. But what I would say is we look to try and give them the tools that they need in order to kind of amplify that messaging organically. Obviously, we have a separate digital team who are responsible for doing a lot of our user acquisition and engaging sort of long-term lapsed players. But our primary directive is to make sure that those current players are kept in the know, that they have those tools to be able to engage with us in many different ways on many different platforms, and that they can have their voice heard as well, I think, which is really important.
Can you give me some examples then? How do you do that?
Yeah, so we have I'll use Twitch as an example, because as I say, we talked about sort of PewDiePie and the kind of the celebs in the gaming world at the moment. We have sort of a weekly Twitch live stream where we sort of bring in some of our developers to talk to our they kind of have a conversation between themselves, but also we ask our community to sort of generate the question pool that we would ask our staff. And we tend to theme them. We would say, for instance, there's one about quests in game, or there's one about the lore in game, or there's one around a particular update that's coming out in the near future. We know that there is a group of players who are going to be really, really excited about that particular area, going to be able to provide us with some really insightful and topical questions that probably actually we wouldn't be able to ask ourselves or have thought of it ourselves. And actually that creates a really it humanizes the guys who are creating the game, but it also provides us with the opportunity to, I suppose, interact with players in a slightly more informal way than we would normally be doing. Obviously, being live on video allows you to kind of, I suppose, humanize things a little bit better than, say, if you're responding to somebody on Reddit or on a Facebook post or something like that. So that's kind of one example. We've done lots of things like we launched a big update in RuneScape over sort of about a month ago now, or just under a month ago. And one of the things that we were really looking to do was kind of amplify the community champions, the people who have completed things first and who have done things that other players possibly might never be able to do. So we've created a few kind of amplification opportunities whereby we can sort of celebrate those players who have done those things first and who have been able to, as I say, go above and beyond to complete the content first. And we found that actually in terms of engagement, players are more than happy to kind of celebrate those individuals and say, actually, because for the average Joe who perhaps spends 1 or 2 hours a day playing the game, they're never going to be able to compete with somebody who is able to perhaps spend a lot longer than that to play it. So
14 hours a day or something. Yeah.
Well, we have seen a few players who have I think they call it no lifing it. where obviously we have things in game to sort of encourage people to log out after sort of every 4 hours or so, take a break, that sort of thing. But obviously when you have an update like that, players will want to be the first to do something, and we thought, well, we'll try and celebrate that race to the first, and bring kind of more of like make it more of an event, make it more of that kind of community. Let's bring everybody together, let's get everybody understanding how that can all work, and who is the people that they should be kind of backing on that race to getting the or completing the content first.
So if I kind of translate this stuff into sort of like, kind of a different kind of business. So the first thing is like these live streams, it's really about giving people a glimpse into your business and what's going on behind the scenes, and allowing them to interact directly with, as you mentioned, the developers, and actually sort of feel like they have some kind of interaction or sort of, influence over sort of decisions that might be made. Is that
yeah,
right?
I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah, I mean, we try and do, obviously those are kind of, I suppose, more formalized live streams. They're things that we script, and we not script. We obviously ask players beforehand. Yeah, we ask players beforehand what the questions are likely to be. We do engage with the chat if there is things that are coming out of that. But obviously, we'll try and, as much as possible, prepare what we can and make sure that the people on the sofas are comfortable with what might be asked.
Okay.
And try and sort of put in some more kind of business as usual style things in there if we feel like we need to address a certain thing. We do things that are perhaps a little bit more off the cuff. We do like to get our staff doing things like, one of the things we're going to be trying to do in the near future is do a series of kind of Instagram live videos with members of the team, where there's a kind of that more one-to-one feeling like you've got with individuals. We've also do things like quizzes. We were thinking about perhaps doing a RuneScape themed Dungeons and Dragons night for our players as well. So we're trying to do things that not just that engagement not just that kind of informational style of things, but also that engagement, that offering experience, that experiential thing that you perhaps wouldn't have been able to get elsewhere. What differentiates us from, say, another content creator who might be able to do very similar content.
Got it. Yeah, that's interesting, because we were sort of throwing an idea around, like having some kind of podcast party type thing, because obviously at the moment everyone's inside. House parties taken off significantly as a sort of social tool, but it's thinking, how can you kind of sort of morph that into something that would be beneficial for a business? And I think as well, as a business, it's sort of easy to say, well, how are we going to benefit from this? And how do you sort of then bring it back to, keeping people focused on the product versus just doing stuff for a laugh? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. We're quite fortunate, really, in that there's community and social tends to be one of those areas which is very, very difficult to attribute value to, particularly organically, because in terms of tracking data, it's quite difficult. If you're looking for engagement rather than conversion, it means that, as I say, it's very difficult beyond sort of reach and engagement metrics to say what the general value of it is to the business. We're quite lucky at Jagex in that actually, from very early on, we've been kind of given the directive that actually we're not that fussed about, say, conversion or link clicks to the website, that kind of thing. That's obviously a nice bonus, but it's actually more important that we are engaging and informing those community members what's going on and finding new and exciting ways to be able to engage with them.
For sure.
So, and we obviously have KPIs, and we have like performance indicators and all that kind of stuff. But actually, what's more important is those kind of engagement metrics where it's not just a share, but it's actually how are people engaging with that content. Is it we're getting a thumbs up from a few people, or is it actually instigating conversation between players and creating that kind of extra level of engagement that perhaps is a bit more valuable to us than, say, somebody just liking a post on Facebook, for instance.
Cool. Okay. So moving on to sort of your influencer strategy.
Sure.
Obviously gaming, like I mentioned before, it's really, there's tons and everyone wants to become like the next big thing in gaming at the moment. There's obviously people who have made a significant amount of money by being influencers in the gaming world, which I think is fascinating. As I say, it was an industry that didn't really exist 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So how do you go about sort of engaging with them? Do you have like a huge budget which you kind of throw at influencers? How does it work in the games world?
I mean, I know that there are a few companies out there with a huge budget. We're not massively one of them.
Right. Okay.
No, we do. We kind of split it into two areas, really. So we've got our influencer management sort of side of things, which is more around how do we nurture and grow the people that are already creating content for us. So we're in the process of building out a more kind of formalized partner program at the moment, which will hopefully allow those creators to support themselves, and for us to be able to kind of give them a show of faith to say, actually, we want to back you and we want to support your kind of career moving forward. So you can take that leap from perhaps it being a passion project or a hobby thing where you get a bit of extra money on the side to actually being a full-time career. And that's kind of what our aim is with that, and to be able to support those creators there. And I think that's probably the more for us, it's probably the higher priority. Whereas we would have for say bigger campaigns, we'd probably look to be how we could amplify what it is that we're doing with say a combination of like creators, but also social media distribution networks like things like Lab Bible and The Hook and places like that, who actually are influential, but they're perhaps not defined as say an influencer in the most traditional sense of the word. So yeah, we've kind of got two different arms, and recently within Jaggers we have actually brought somebody in who is our head of influencer management, who now that's his sole job, which I don't think you probably would have had sort of 2 or 3 years ago. No. But that sort of responsibility did kind of fall to myself beforehand, and it was a interesting experience. Working with influencers is always one of those things which is it's exciting, and they're really, really creative individuals who can know exactly how they want to talk to their audiences. But a lot of them obviously have kind of built this out as their career without necessarily working in the corporate world before. So sometimes there are things that perhaps are creative differences, let's say, sometimes, which can be quite challenging to overcome sometimes. But yeah, I mean, we've done a few campaigns now with sort of paid creators. Notably sort of when we launched Old School RuneScape on mobile, and obviously mobile is a great platform with which to be able to do things like influencer marketing, because it's very easily trackable. You can identify very easily how impactful things are. And I think we were looking at things like a CPM of about £4.50 and a CPI of about £2.50, and we ended up hitting our goals quite substantially, really. Once we were able to kind of align our data with Google's data, we were invited into a trial program with Google to help kind of identify what the attributable revenue and attributable downloads you would be able to get through Google Play, because obviously they have YouTube and Google Play, so they can kind of tighten the knot that with influence marketing, if you have sort of a track link, you can obviously track where people have directly clicked the link and say downloaded your game, but there is a vast proportion of people who would see the video and then go to an app store and then type in the thing and go down there. That Google can close that gap, or they have been able to close that gap with the trial that we were doing with them.
Really?
Yeah, which is fantastic. And we were able to kind of more accurately track what our CPI was, where we hadn't been able to before, which was really, really exciting. So rather than this, we found it was about a 376% increase on what we'd actually been able to track, which was really, really exciting. And it really offered us the gumption kind of within the company to actually say that this is something that we should be doing more of. And actually it kind of paved the way for us to be able to actually get ahead in to support it, to do this kind of thing more often.
It's very exciting. It's something I've had very little experience with, but I think, I thought, especially do you know much about sort of micro-influence? Because that's a term that's been thrown around a lot at the moment.
Yeah. So I mean, micro-influence is kind of what I would say are the, I think it's more of a term for, say, something like Instagram. You tend to find a lot of people on Instagram identifying themselves as micro-influencers or micro-bloggers or something along those lines, where their audiences tend to be a lot more engaged because they're very specialized, or they're experts or whatnot in a particular area. And as say, it is a really viable option for people if you're looking to do influencer marketing to identify sort of a group of micro-influencers. It's a bit more time, takes a bit more time, and because some of, again, kind of going back to working with creators, some of them don't necessarily have, say, agents or have a formalized process through where they would go about doing stuff. So it can take a little bit more time. But if you're looking for kind of higher engagement rates and perhaps a more authentic message for your audience to, or their audience to kind of buy into your product, micro-influencers can be a really viable option, because sometimes if you look at some of the higher level influencers, they are doing quite a few now branded campaigns, so that kind of level of authenticity can be foregone a little bit sometimes when you are looking for these kind of larger creators. And I think there is a graph that I've referenced a couple of times with when I've done sort of talks on this sort of thing, but there's like a graph where if you sort of, so I'm just getting my, you look at engagement versus follow count, and the engagement kind of drops off as you go down through. The higher the amount of followers you've got, the lower the engagement is on something like Instagram. So high, I suppose it's high engagement, probably lower visibility, but it can be much more valuable and provide a much more authentic message.
Okay, interesting. Have you got, in terms of like, how do you go out and source influencers? Is it something you kind of do through a booking platform or like an agency, or is it just you've always been kind of in touch with them directly, and that's now where you've got this in-house person to manage that?
Yeah, again, we kind of got a few different ways of doing it, really. We're quite lucky in that a lot of people have played RuneScape in some form at some point in their gaming careers. So if you do approach people directly and say, hi, we'd love you to start thinking about creating some content around RuneScape, you don't have to go through the whole what is it and what's in it for me kind of thing. So we when we have reached out organically, that's tended to be a really kind of good way for us to be able to do it. But we have, because we haven't had the dedicated in-house resource for a long time, what we've tended to do is we've tended to go through an agency to be able to source some of those creators, and they've dealt with a lot of like the legal rigmarole and the financial rigmarole that comes with it, because I think that's probably the most time-consuming part of it, is the identification and the kind of the negotiation negotiation phase of the content creation. So
is that a specialist game? Was it a specialist games agency or just something? Because I'm intrigued to see, have you got any agencies that you could suggest for people who are looking to do this?
Yeah, so we've I mean, gaming, as you said, it's kind of I won't say it's unique, but it has kind of unique qualities sometimes within within the wider influencer sphere. So we've tended to work with companies who specialize in gaming or games. So we've worked with the likes of Kairos Media, who we still kind of work with now. We've had a few other people pitch to us that have had really good suggestions. I'll be honest with you, I can't remember any of the names off the top of my head, and I wouldn't want to misquote them. But no, there are loads out there, particularly within, say, the games sector, because there are so many creators now that are popping up. And obviously gaming is becoming one of these things, particularly obviously with the situation that we find ourselves in, where actually people go there because they try and get away from whatever is going on in their actual lives, and they use it as an escape, or that actually there's not really an awful lot else to do at the moment. So playing a game is actually a viable alternative. So it's only going to, I think there's probably going to be a bubble bursting at some point, but from everything that I've seen, it looks like it's only going upwards at this stage.
We've seen similar in uptake in listening figures on podcasts and radio, and just a general increase in customers. I think the entertainment industry as a whole is doing all right at the moment. Whereas obviously some of the other industries are sort of suffering. So it's quite an interesting place to be. But I guess it means that we're all a lot busier than perhaps we were. Even just a couple of months ago. Suddenly there's a big increase in demand and for various different things. So that brings us on to sort of managing an online community. Obviously, you have to look after, I imagine, this must be in the millions of people who are really engaging with all of your products. How do you go about sort of approaching that from to begin with?
Yeah, it's quite daunting. As I say, we're in a fairly fortunate place in that these are established communities already. I think it's probably a slightly different conversation to be having. How do you nurture and build a community versus how do you maintain an already kind of established one? But because, as I say, I've had more experience doing the latter, I'll talk about that for a little bit in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
But we have, I think, first and foremost, it's really important to work out where it is that your players are and where they are engaging with you. Engaging and talking about you, and then I suppose spending a bit of time working out if it's worth muscling in and actually creating something that's going to facilitate that discussion a little bit easier.
Yeah.
We've done things like a good example with Reddit, for instance, is actually we didn't create our own subreddit. Our players created that probably about, I'd say nearly sort of 10, 11 years ago now. And actually, we're happy with them owning it because they moderate it. They do a really good job of making sure that everything is kind of as it should be, and they can offer sort of 24-hour coverage where we can't. And it feels very much like it's a place where players can speak their true feelings without the feeling that they might be censored or they might be like, we do have a pretty hefty presence on something like Reddit. We have sort of, I don't know, I think 170 staff that have got different social media accounts, which is really, really a positive thing, and it allows us to be able to engage with our players on all manner of platforms. But
so is that sorry to interrupt there, but is that so that when you say 170 staff, presumably they're not all dedicated to community management or social media? There's a range of staff. So is that kind of written into the job description, that, or is it just something that you try and encourage staff, no matter what they do, to really get involved with?
Yeah, it's definitely an encouragement thing. I think in terms of sort of company ethos, we do try and be very player facing or community facing, just because we've talked about kind of the humanization of the brand and making it feel like actually everybody's engaging together, and actually the devs really care about the game and care about making it the best possible place that they can for the players. In terms of our actual community team size, we're probably about I think we're about 8 or 9 at the moment.
Oh wow!
Okay, so of the people who are engaging, the majority of them would be kind of developers, or they would be people who perhaps work in our marketing teams, or they might be our localization teams. We've got people in our facilities teams on there. We've got people who work in our finance teams in there. Kind of the entire spectrum of people who work within the company. And obviously, they're not all going to engage. They're not all going to be experts on the game, and they're not all going to be people who are going to be able to answer every question that a player might ask them. But they are also people who have very specialized skills, and they have the ability to kind of share what life at Jagex is all about. And I think that's a really, really positive thing to be able to do, kind of show the inner workings of the company and offer that kind of level of transparency and I suppose a peephole into what life at perhaps their favorite gaming company is all about. And that you say, we do probably, I'd say probably of the 170 staff or so, probably you've got a core group of about 25 to 30 who are the really kind of high engagers, and they will primarily be sort of community management and a few developers and some of our sort of higher level producers who kind of obviously want to try and make sure that level of communication is very, very constant and very, very consistent. But yeah, it's one of those things where you do start to then establish those personal brands also within a company as well. So we have a member of staff who's got about 75,000 followers on Twitter, and he's kind of built his own personal brand that is something unto like anything that I've ever seen before at a company. He's got we're all called like Mod so and so. He's called Mod Ash, and he's all the community call him God Ash because they're kind of that. They're that. I think if he were ever to leave the company, I think there would be a mutiny, because he's kind of that revered by the rest of the community, and to have that kind of level of I suppose reverence within a community is obviously a really kind of powerful thing for us, but it's also a really it's a really great thing for him as well, and really great thing for our community to have that level of somebody who really, really cares about what it is that they're talking about. He replies to every single post that he gets on Twitter, which when you get hundreds of posts a day is just obscene, really. And he's a developer as well. He's not even a community manager. So
I was going to say, does that have any impact on sort of the amount of time he's actually spending on sort of his day-to-day work versus in the engagement thing? How does he balance that? That must be tricky.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. We do like one of the things that obviously having a lot of staff on social means you have to have kind of guidelines and support options, and we have like a social media policy and all of that jazz. We have e-learning things that we offer staff, and we have like an onboarding process whereby you need to complete X, Y, and Z things before you're allowed a social media account and to represent Jagex on social.
Okay.
Part of those guidelines obviously are kind of best practice things, and understanding what your limits are, how to engage in if things go wrong, what to do if, say, the worst should happen and say you start getting personally attacked by a member of the community, that sort of thing. So we have guidance for kind of lots of different eventualities. Thankfully, a lot more of the negative things we don't really need to use very often, but obviously working within an area where there are lots of very passionate people, sometimes things can bubble over a little bit, but generally the positives outweigh the negatives.
Excellent. I think there's lots to go off there. So if anyone has any questions for James or myself, please feel free to put them in the comments. We are watching the comments. We're going to be starting to take some questions now. So firstly, got a few in here. What tool do you use to locate where the majority of your community is, or where people are talking about your product or business?
So we've used a few. We've used in the early days we used Brandwatch, which is like a Boolean focused tool which allows you to search for certain keywords and where people are talking about them. It's a very powerful tool. We found that it was a little bit complicated for a lot of people to quite grasp how to use correctly, so we weren't getting the use or the value out of it. So we moved into something called Radio.co, which is a very similar thing, but it was perhaps a little bit more simplified in terms of the UI and the design. Again, we found it worked to an extent, but because of the fact that it's Boolean search, it requires a lot of upkeep. So you need to update the keywords regularly, particularly if you're updating as much as we are, and certain terms become really, really zeitgeisty within the community on a regular basis. So again, we're looking at alternatives, and we've kind of stumbled on one which is called Player XP, which is specifically focused on gaming, which is a sentiment tracking tool, which is powered by machine learning. So it identifies, or we've chucked some stuff into it to begin with, and basically it's learning how to identify what defines as a RuneScape or an old school RuneScape or Jagex related term, and then it assigns a sentiment value to it. So is it 90% positive? Is it 20% negative? That kind of thing, and it starts to build up a picture of a macro level sentiment score within your community, but it does also drill down into the different platforms as well. It's really good for gaming because it identifies things like reviews, so it splits out by reviews, online communities, which is the likes of Steam forums, Reddit, Discord, sorry, not Discord, online Reddit, your own forums, and Steam forums, and also social, so the YouTube, Twitter, Facebooks of this world as well. So it breaks it down by that platform as well, so you can identify what kinds of people are talking about your brand in specific ways, and is, say, for instance, people on Reddit being very, very negative about something, but actually on Twitter people are being really, really positive about it. So perhaps there's a way that we can articulate it better to those players who are not receiving it in the right way, for instance.
Okay, that's very interesting. So it kind of just gives you a really good overview of what's going on all these different platforms. Sounds very, very clever. Okay, how about podcasters? Does Jagex work with podcasters at all for influencer marketing, or is it mainly social media?
I would love to. We haven't ever as yet, but I think we were talking, James, before we both came online about podcasts, and actually I'm a huge podcast fan. I'm planning to run the London Marathon, and it gets me through the longer runs listening to podcasts back to back. But I would love to work with podcasts. It's something that would probably go through our head of influencer management now. But I know when we were discussing launching Old School, RuneScape on mobile in 2018, it was something that we wanted to try and explore. Obviously, there are kind of sub-genres within podcasts as well, as there are with other platforms as well. So we were looking at sort of cosplay communities, ASMR, that sort of thing. That all those different communities that actually they've got a really dedicated support base, and actually probably would be able to authenticate that message a little bit better than, say, somebody who puts out a sponsored video every week. I think that podcasts do a really good job of using the personalities within those podcasts to perhaps articulate the message in a slightly different, unique way that their audiences will be more receptive to. But I think you would also need to make sure that we have the trackable stuff sorted before we would talk to podcasts about potentially supporting some of the stuff that we're doing. So you probably will want to make sure that, say, our voucher system would be working if you've got a discount code, for instance.
Okay. Interesting. And how would you go about if you want to find influencers to promote? It could be a product, it could be a service, doesn't have to necessarily be game related. What would be the best way of actually sort of going out and saying, right, okay, how do we identify influencers that potentially we can work with to promote my podcast or promote my business or my product?
If you're looking at a really manual a manual way of doing it, say that you don't have an awful lot of resource or money to spend on, say, an agency, or being able to get somebody else to do it for you. I think it's all, because I imagine your time will be at a premium if you're in that kind of a situation. It's about identifying where you want to be talking to those individuals first of all, so you can kind of narrow down that pool of potential people. So if you know, for instance, or you have a suspicion that, say, if you were to, I don't know, that YouTube was a platform that would be really, really beneficial for you. So that, say that you've, on your own YouTube channel, you've experienced a high amount of engagement on it, for instance, is probably a decent indication that the kind of content that you're creating is actually resonating quite well, and it would probably resonate very well with other people's communities as well. That would probably be a good indication that YouTube might be a good place to go for. And then there are a few, you can just do something as basic as searching for specific key terms on the search bar. Say if you're a dog walking business, for instance, you could search dog walking and have that as a search and see what comes up. I would be less inclined to go for the really big guys and have a look and see what perhaps comes up on page 2 or page 3, and see what will come up. But also there are lots of free tools that will allow you to do that kind of thing a bit less manually. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but let me comment in the on the LinkedIn link when I've been able to remember a couple of the names. But yeah, there are a couple of really good tools that will allow you to do a trial, that will allow you to kind of put in certain parameters. So you're looking for somebody within a certain level of followers, or that have certain demographics to their audiences, and you can plug it in and you'll get a list of people that would be probably pretty good for that particular activation.
Cool. Okay. Also, someone's asked, has Jagex gone into podcasting at all yet? Have you thought about doing a podcast, for any of your games like Run Escape or?
We absolutely have, and we were in the process of being able to pull together our podcast, and then the coronavirus crisis happened, and we have not been in the office for the last sort of 4 weeks. So trying to organise that kind of thing obviously can be done remotely, but I think we've kind of had other priorities that we needed to try and get sorted before we can sort of get into these new and exciting things that we're doing. So yeah, podcast is definitely something that we would like to be doing. We're actually doing our remote live streams, weekly live streams, almost like in the form of a podcast. Anyway,
I was going to say, it's if you're already using live streams as a way of engaging with people, which anyone could do, doesn't have to just be reserved for gaming. I know the reason I'm saying this is because we've had a couple of comments, people saying this is just gaming strategy. It's gaming strategy. The things we're talking about here can really be applied to absolutely any business. Doesn't matter if you're running a podcast, radio station, you're selling a product. These principles can really apply for anything. So I think live streams are a great tool to sort of actually communicate with an audience, no matter what it is you're selling, what it is you've got. but actually converting that into a podcast there's not too much of a difference, really, is there?
No, there's a lot of repurposing of things that can happen, and I'm not going to say it's a one size fits all, because obviously there are optimizations and things that you would need to do within each individual platform to make that content relevant for that particular platform. But yeah, there is definitely things that you can be doing. Say if you do a live stream and you've got certain sound bites that you want to be able to cover, you can then clip those bits out, save them as MP4 videos, and then upload them to your other platforms, which are probably more suited to short form video. You can also, as you say, take perhaps some of the audio recording, upload it as a podcast potentially, there's lots of different ways that you can multi-purpose different types of content. We are trying to make sure that when we do that, each bit of content is optimized for each of those platforms. So say for instance, if you were to upload a live stream or a VOD bit of content to Twitter or for Facebook, for instance, you have text on the screen or subtitles at the very minimum. You go straight into the action. You don't worry too much about introductions or whatever. And also that it's a square image as well, because that obviously would tend to be favored by the algorithms that be as well. So you can definitely do that. It's all about making sure that those individual bits of content are then used in the appropriate ways for those different other platforms.
I think that's, you make a really good point there, and interesting. We with one of these working lunches, I spoke to Amy Woods, I think it was about a month or two ago, and we were specifically talking about repurposing content. Like that's one of the benefits of doing this stuff and spending time on creating content. Like, for example, what we're doing right now is you can easily then turn that into content which is multi-channel, works across different mediums. It's just a case of really taking it, thinking about what the best bits are, and how you can kind of take out chunks of that message, which is going to appeal to the people who say on Instagram, they've got very short amounts of time span. So, like 1 minute little videos or 30-second videos, just getting the best bits and kind of reformatting them. But it's a way to make the content go further, I think.
Yeah, and it's about, as you say, making it go further. You can, because generally, if you say, let's use video content as an example, video content is obviously a lot of the cost and a lot of the time sink in video content is the actual filming of it and the editing of it. So what we've tried to do a little bit more is actually, if we know that we're going to be on a shoot, or that we've got individuals who are going to be available for only a certain period of time on that shoot, for instance, we've made sure that as well as also filming the content that we need from, say, for a YouTube video, we've also logged all of, say, the outtakes that have come out of it, or we've asked the guys who are in the video to do a little video intro, for instance. So here's what we're going to be covering in this video, and then we've used that as a really good way to be able to put on social, say, here's going to brief summary of what we're going to be covering, watch the full video here, and then link to the full kind of long form YouTube video as kind of an additional bit of value as well. So yeah, I mean, it's about being clever with how you do it, and being prepared and giving an understanding to the people who are going to be capturing the content, that what you're going to be required at the end of it as well. Because we did used to be in a position where, as I say, we kind of briefed something and that's exactly what we got back, which is great. But I think we're in a place now where we're having to be a little bit more clever with how we do things, particularly with the current situation as well. And that actually we're having to think of different ways to be able to film and create content anyway. It seems like a good opportunity to kind of reset and actually think, what is it that we're doing with this? How are we going to be proving the actual value of this, and what are we doing to build it up so that it's actually going to be seen by as many different people as possible on the platforms we have available to us.
Great. James, thank you very much for your time today. It's been fantastic speaking to you, and it's been really interesting getting an insight into sort of how you're doing things over at Jagex. So thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, no problem.